And if you're just joining us tonight, let's bring you a recap of the breaking news coming to us from the Middle East that a ceasefire deal has reportedly been reached between Israel and Hamas. That is according to US officials and Arab mediators. The agreement, though yet to be officially announced, involves a 6-week truce, the release of hostages by Hamas, and in exchange the release of Palestinian detainees. We're also hearing a statement from the President-elect Donald Trump in the last few moments, who has said that we have secured a deal for the hostages in the Middle East to be released, adding, this is from Donald Trump, I say, they will be released shortly. So that news just in from the President-elect Donald Trump. Mediators in Qatar, Egypt and the US will oversee that deal, which at this stage we understand includes plans for a phased troop withdrawal and the reconstruction efforts in Gaza. When we hear official announcements expected later this evening, we will, of course, bring that to you.
Thank you, Sam. And just to repeat that breaking news, if you're joining us, a Gaza ceasefire deal has been reached in these last few minutes. And that's the Israel-Gaza conflict, with reports from the United States that a Gaza ceasefire deal has been reached. And the implementation of the agreements will be guaranteed by Qatar, by Egypt and the United States. And just to repeat that second breaking news line, in these past few moments, Donald Trump has issued a statement saying we have a deal for the hostages in the Middle East. They will be released shortly. This, of course, coming just a few days after Donald Trump had threatened a severe escalation of the situation unless those hostages were released. Well, let's now cross to Colonel Richard Kemp for his expert analysis on this. Colonel Kemp, always a pleasure to have your company. You and I have been speaking about this since the conflict began. And very, very early on, Colonel Richard Kemp, we spoke about how a ceasefire may benefit Hamas. It may benefit them to regroup. Has this latest ceasefire, is it the right thing? Is it a good move? And will it ensure that Israel and the West gets the best outcome?
Well, I think the very good thing about a ceasefire, assuming it does actually happen, and from what we've heard of the potential terms of the ceasefire, and of course we don't know the detail yet, is that there will be a significant number of Israeli hostages released by Hamas. That's the intention. There's 94 people who were kidnapped 15 months ago, who have been tortured, sexually abused, in some cases raped, and in other cases murdered by Hamas in Gaza. And some of those will be released under this deal. So that can only be seen, I think, as good news. Of course, it potentially benefits Hamas as well, because it takes the pressure off them. They've had huge damage inflicted upon them by Israel since this war began, and they're currently fighting for their own survival. So there's good and bad to it. I think, from what I understand of the likely terms of the deal, the IDF will remain in Gaza. They will continue to occupy the border between Gaza and Egypt, which is critical to starving Hamas of more weaponry and more resources they need, and also other critical areas of Gaza. But one thing I would say is I don't think we should see this as being the end of the conflict. It's going to be a temporary cessation, possibly developing into a full-scale end of the war, but probably, I think more likely it's going to be resumed at some point in the future. The second point I think that's worth noting is that this is not a Biden negotiated deal. This has been forced, I think, on Hamas by the threats of President Trump, and President Trump imminently coming into the White House, and their fears for what that might mean. And the other point, I think the final point I'd make, is that this also should be seen as part of a wider strategy in the Middle East. Trump and Prime Minister Netanyahu have been discussing the strategic plan for this conflict from the time Trump enters the White House. And I think we can see this as part of that strategy.
And Colonel Kemp, just for people listening on the radio, we are now having live pictures on our screen from Tel Aviv. People are hugging. There are pictures there of hostages being held aloft. Of course, this has been something we've seen since the beginning, since October the 7th, 2023 onwards. The pictures of those hostages, many still missing, a huge issue. We seem to be approaching some form of endgame. As you say, Colonel Kemp, we have no idea how many of those 94 hostages still detained will make it out, what kind of state they'll be in. Those human stories will unroll over the coming days, no doubt. But back to that point you made there about the politics. Isn't it interesting, Colonel Kemp, how all along Donald Trump said, I'll have this war over within a week? Well, it's happened before he's even got in power. Talk us through the political leverage, the political menace, the political unpredictability you think Donald Trump has brought to this, and how you believe that that's escalated the ending of this conflict.
Yeah, I think one of the great strengths that Trump has got, whether you like him or don't, I think most people will accept he's very unpredictable. No one knows what he's going to do. Throughout this conflict, President Biden has been applying, although the US have given a great deal of support to Israel, they've also been applying a restraining hand on what Israel can and cannot do in relation to Gaza, in relation to Lebanon, and crucially, I think, in relation to Iran. And now I think the likelihood is those gloves are going to come off. And as I said, Prime Minister Netanyahu and President Trump will certainly have been discussing this and coming to a conclusion about how the war will be conducted after Trump gets into the White House. And I think one of the fears is going to be that one of the fears from the enemy's perspective is that he will probably give diplomatic cover, possibly military support indirectly to Israel for a major strike against Iran. And of course, Hamas being not exactly a proxy, but something close to a proxy of Iran, and certainly sponsored by Iran and funded and supported by Iran, Hamas will no doubt be, to an extent at least, influenced by what Trump might do to Iran and the directions that are being received, as much as they are, from Iran to Hamas about what they should be doing now. I think there's going to be immense fear in Tehran about Trump coming into the White House.
And Colonel Kemp, I know you're supremely well connected in the Israeli army area, the intelligence and the governance area. What a difference this will make. The Biden administration was dallying, was it not, all the time with a ceasefire that seemed to benefit Hamas, the threat of withdrawing armaments, playing the liberal politics side. All of a sudden, the drums are very, very different. And we've seen this dramatic breakthrough. It's incredible. What's the reaction from the Israelis you've been speaking to?
Yeah, I mean, let's not forget also that it's not just President Trump's sort of vision behind the scenes. He's also had his Middle East envoy designate directly involved in the negotiations. And of course, that's a new development we haven't seen before. We've seen months of negotiations over potential ceasefires. Each time Israel has shown willing to have a ceasefire, and each time Hamas have refused to do it. That's now changed, as you say, as a result of a change in the political situation. I think there's going to be mixed feelings among Israelis, certainly the ones I've spoken to. Of course, there could well be significant upsides to this apart from the release of some of the hostages. And one of the upsides, as I mentioned, is the potential free hand that President Trump will give to the Israelis, and that's welcomed, I think, by most Israelis. But there's downsides to it as well. And one of the downsides is that part of the deal undoubtedly is going to involve releasing probably a significant number of Hamas terrorists who are held prisoner inside Israel. And that will be part of it. And probably more Hamas terrorists who have been carrying out murders and other criminal activity. More will be released than hostages released. So that's a downside. And of course, the other downside, which people are fearful about, is that Hamas is not totally destroyed. Hamas still has some capability. Most of their military infrastructure has been written down or completely taken out, but they have been recruiting more forces to their cause. Those people will not be able to, in my view, to do significant damage to Israel along the sort of 7th of October lines, but they still have the ability to exercise control over the population of Gaza. And that's therefore a situation which cannot be allowed to continue, whatever the outcome of the ceasefire, Hamas cannot still be allowed to have control, as it does to a large extent now inside Gaza, of the civilian population. So a big concern and a problem that's got to be dealt with at some point.
Colonel Kemp, I'm joined in the studio by Chris Hope, our political editor. He has a question for you.
Yeah, Colonel Kemp, Chris Hope here for GB News in the studio with Martin. Last Tuesday, Donald Trump said this: if those hostages are not back by the inauguration, all hell will break out. He said that twice in that extraordinary press conference from Mar-a-Lago. Do you think that was part of a kind of a targeted diplomatic offensive by Trump to get this sorted out by the time he gets into the White House? And should we be saying this is the first win of the Trump second term?
Yeah, I think without a doubt. He said that, as you say, he said that same thing pretty much twice. And it was intended to intimidate, which it seems to have done. And not just, as I mentioned before, not just to intimidate Hamas, because they don't know what Trump will do. Trump is so unpredictable. But also, I think, maybe even more significantly, to intimidate their masters in Tehran, the Iranian Ayatollahs, who have been so badly weakened by the immense destruction of Hamas, the destruction to a large extent also of Hezbollah, the loss of Syria, which was a key territory for them, as well as Israeli strikes, recent Israeli strikes against Iran. So the Iranians have been badly weakened, and they will fear Trump coming in. And those words, all hell will break loose, they will probably think that will be applied as much to them as it could be applied to Hamas inside Gaza.
Colonel Richard Kemp, thank you for joining us on today's show on this historic moment. The Gaza ceasefire deal has been reached. And Colonel Kemp, thank you for joining us throughout this entire conflict since the past October the 7th. Your expertise is very, very much appreciated. Thank you for joining us today on GB News. Now, just a reminder to those joining us, ceasefire deal has been reached, and we have some live pictures on our screen there, both from Tel Aviv, inside Israel, scenes of jubilation and also of immense relief, people holding placards of hostages still held. As Colonel Kemp said there are 94 hostages still in captivity. We do not know the situation with them. We don't know if they're alive, if their health situation, what that's like. And we also have scenes there from Gaza, also celebrations there. The war is over.